of the policy plan amendment, focus topic discussion on transportation. I have just started the recording, and there's also a transcript going on in the transcript window, but we'll have notes on that as well. There'll be two presenters tonight, Taylor Waymeyer and Tim Kutz from the FCDOT department, and they will be presenting, and we'll take questions at the end of each section. So, Taylor, if you would please start.
Of course. Thanks, Bob. Good evening. I am Taylor Waymeyer, and I am joined by Bob Pecora and Tim Kutz from the Transportation Planning section of the Fairfax County Department of Transportation. As Bob mentioned, this meeting will be recorded and posted on our website. Tonight, we will be giving a brief overview on the policy plan update, as well as the purpose and applicability of the comprehensive plan and the project timeline. We will also be presenting on two focused topics within the transportation element to support the policy plan update. The goals of the policy plan are to review, update, add, and streamline existing elements, as well as ensure it aligns with the countywide strategic plan, the One Fairfax policy, and other recently adopted policies and initiatives. While the entire policy plan is authorized for update, we're focusing current efforts on the elements that are most often used, that most often overlap, and are in need of modernization. Phase 1 is focused on updates to the preface, land use, transportation, environment, parks and recreation, and human services, with consideration of new policies related to community health and equity. To accomplish this plan amendment, staff has established an interagency team of 14 topic leads who are subject matter experts within their topical areas. Phase 2 of the policy plan is anticipated to begin shortly after Phase 1 is completed in late 2025. Phase 2 will address the housing, economic development, heritage resources, revitalization, and visual and performing arts elements, as well as the Chesapeake Bay supplement. I'd like to start by providing a brief overview on the difference between the comprehensive plan and the county's regulatory documents to help frame the work of this amendment and future recommendations. The policy plan includes goals, objectives, and policies. The policy plan applies countywide, therefore, it is important to ensure the policies developed are general and flexible enough to apply across the county, but also targeted enough to address the topic we are working to improve. The comprehensive plan is a guide that sets the land use vision for the county and is implemented through the development review process of zoning applications. The area plan volumes provide specific guidance and recommendations pertaining to development within the areas of the county to ensure the development is addressing area and site-specific considerations. The zoning ordinance is a regulatory document that applies to all structures and is intended to promote the health, safety, and general welfare of the public and to implement the comprehensive plan. Finally, the Public Facilities Manual provides the specific engineering guidelines for the development and construction of projects. Currently, we are focusing on the outreach and research phase of the effort, as noted. There is still more work to do. Our next step is to begin drafting the policy text and guidance next year, and we anticipate bringing the policy plan update to the Board of Supervisors by fall of 2025. The current transportation policies and themes focus on a multimodal system where we ensure safety for all users of facilities and services, provide choices, and balance the modes on a transportation network. Goals and strategies that were sound in 1990s still have value for 2024 and beyond, such as reducing single occupant vehicle use, expanding pedestrian and bike facilities, as well as increasing public transportation use, all while adapting to new county plans, policies, and strategies. With this update, we also want to identify new themes, goals, and recommendations that we can carry forward.
All right, I think I'm up. So we can go to the next slide. And I'm going to talk about comprehensive transportation analysis, or CTA, and how this relates to the policy plan update. This is sort of a separate project, but if we go to the next slide, one of the things that the policy plan is doing is sort of looking at the county-wide strategic plan. Fairfax County has had one of these in place for the last several years, starting in 2021. The current version, as you see on the right, is from June 2024. And one of the goals in the mobility and transportation section, so MT3 as shown on the bottom, is to revise the methodology for how transportation impacts are assessed. And revise them in such a way that takes focus away solely from vehicles and sort of looks at a multimodal analysis. So not sort of ignoring the vehicle, but weighing all these different modes sort of against each other to see if, for example, we're doing a transportation study and that study recommends increasing capacity for vehicles, decreasing delay for vehicles at a signal, for example. That's going to have an effect on other modes like walking across the street. Maybe you're not going to have space for a bike lane. And so what the CTA does is sort of assesses all these different modes and then identifies those trade-offs that might happen if we're proposing those types of solutions. And so what we're trying to do in relating this to the policy plan is we have a couple of policy notes that kind of reference level of service for vehicles, sort of meaning delay for vehicles. And so there's a kind of a thought process and, okay, if we need to change that, do we need to also update targets for some of these other measures that are pedestrian focused, bicycle focused, transit focused that we're looking at through the CTA? So if we go to the next slide, this is just a quick look at the timeline for the CTA project. So we've formally called this additional measures of effectiveness. Measures of effectiveness, basically a way of calling the different metrics that we're using in these transportation studies. And we started with researching over 35 of these throughout the country to see which ones we thought would be most effective and provide the data that we needed in our new study. And so we went through that process. We ended up selecting 10 measures, including some of the ones that we've been using in existing studies and past studies. And then phase 2 is really sort of the codification of all those. So describing in detail the methodologies for each of the measures. And then the big part of that is kind of setting up a framework and a process for completing the studies, how we measure these things, what kind of targets we're setting for the specific measures. And when we get the information, what do we do with it? And so we're nearing the end of this project. We're actually looking to publish a CTA user's manual, a quick guide, which is kind of the SparkNotes version of the beefier user's manual, as well as some outreach materials to sort of bring this out in the community to folks who don't have the exposure to transportation and might just want sort of a general idea of what we're doing. And so we should have all that ready within the next few weeks. And a lot of the measures that we are, where we have rolled into the CTA are being incorporated in studies that are ongoing right now. So we can go to the next slide. And so I mentioned MOEs, measures of effectiveness, but some of the other key terminology from the CTA, one is area type. And so if you look at the map on the right, we're really basing this plan off of the concept for future development's land classification system. And the reason being is we have different thresholds or target depending on what the measure is that we're looking at. And I'll get into that a little more when we go over the specific measures. But we realized, for example, that Tyson's Urban Center does not have the same transportation needs as does Clifton or some of the rural areas of the county. We're going to need to treat, for example, pedestrian delay differently in those more urban areas than we would in some of the more rural areas of the county where you're not going to really see as many pedestrians. And so the idea is to set up area types based on this map that's already established in the county. And I'll go over those different area types on a future slide. And then modal emphasis, this is really just speaking to which modes we want to prioritize. So walking, biking, transit, vehicle use within an area type. Thresholds, again, thresholds or targets, it's kind of what we're aiming for with each of the measures. Okay, next slide. And so here's a look at the process. And you can see on the left the different area types. So we combined urban center with transit station areas. They're sort of similar area types. Suburban centers and community business centers, or CBCs, are in area type 2. And then kind of down the list, getting into the more low density and industrial areas. And so you can see the modal priorities for each area type highlighted. So in area type 1, for example, you have pedestrians, cyclists, and transit users as the priority modes. One important note to make, we are still collecting data on vehicles in areas 1 and 2. We are still collecting data on all the other modes in all the other areas. The real key to looking at the modal priority is sort of when you get to the end of the study and you see where you might need to make improvements, and how are those improvements, or mitigations as we often call them, affecting those priority modes. We want to make sure that we're hitting the targets for the measures for pedestrians, cyclists, transit, and area type 1, for example, and not sort of improving vehicle capacity or vehicle delay at the expense of those measures in that area. And so we apply these, broadly speaking, to 3 different project types. So zoning actions, comprehensive planning studies, which could be large area studies or what we call site-specific plan amendments, SSPAs, and then corridor studies. So looking at, for example, we have a Gallows Road study going on right now, looking at a long corridor, and in looking at those different area types and project types, we create a framework of measures and thresholds. So not all 10 measures that we kind of selected through the CTA process are going to be used in every single zoning action or comprehensive plan. And I'll get into that on the next slide. But at the end of the study, what we're really looking for is, are we meeting these thresholds that we set for each measure? Are we meeting the targets? If we're not, again, going back to the drawing board, so to speak, and kind of seeing what we can do to improve some of the measures. So if vehicles are a priority, are we improving vehicle delay? If pedestrians are a priority, are we improving pedestrian level of comfort to an acceptable level as deemed acceptable in the CTA? Next slide. And so here's a look at all the measures. I'll note that this is sort of the minimum. We're in the CTAs that we're doing now, so the comprehensive planning studies and the zoning studies, this is kind of the baseline that we're working from. But especially in corridor studies, you're going to see a lot more different measures used, different MOEs used, looking at vehicle speeds, for example. But again, this is sort of the baseline that we want to include in these studies going forward. And you can see on the far right how we've highlighted the different study types. So zoning actions, corridor studies, comprehensive planning studies, and the different icons. So again, vehicle volume to capacity ratio, we're using it in corridor studies and comprehensive planning, not necessarily in zoning actions. And today I'm going to go over the additional measures. I'm not going to cover the existing measures that we've traditionally used in our studies. Next slide. So what we've added to the transportation study is a couple of pedestrian elements. So the first one is pedestrian delay. And if any of you are familiar with what the vehicle level of service tables look like, this is basically a mirror image of that. We've got on the right side, LOS, or level of service, expressed as a letter grade. And then you can see to the left of that, seconds of delay for pedestrians and the cycle length. And so the point of showing this is really to again, identify the trade-offs. If we're improving vehicle throughput or improving vehicle delay, that's going to have an effect on folks who are trying to cross the street. So decreasing vehicle delay will thereby increase pedestrian delay. And so we want to make sure that if we're doing that, we're understanding the consequences and setting the goals for the different area types. Again, this is where there's a difference in the different areas that we're looking at. Areas 1 and 2, those more urban areas, we're going to have a lower threshold for delay. So 40 seconds or less would be deemed acceptable. And then in those more suburban, rural areas of the county, areas 3, 4, and 5, we'd have a higher threshold, 60 seconds of delay. Going to the next measure, pedestrian level of comfort. This typically we would look at whether or not a sidewalk is standard or substandard, or do a gap analysis, which means, okay, is there a sidewalk here or is there not one here? This goes beyond that to really assess the how comfortable someone would feel walking along the sidewalk based on a number of factors. So the pathway width, how wide you have to walk along the sidewalk, the adjacent buffer, the speed limit on the adjacent roadway, some other elements like the presence of street trees or a parking lane. All those get rolled into a score from 1 to 5, 1 being very comfortable, 5 being no pathway or no crossing. And so what this allows us to do is to look at an area, rate the crossings and the sidewalks in the project area, and sort of help identify which ones might need to be prioritized or fixed over some of the other locations. Next slide. Bicycle level of traffic stress is pretty similar to pedestrian level of comfort in that, again, you're looking at rating a facility based on attributes of that facility. So for example, we're looking at the average daily traffic on a roadway, whether or not the cyclist is having to ride within mixed traffic, so without a bike lane or without a shared use path, for example. And we're kind of rolling all those together, reduce a score from 1, which would be comfortable for all ages and abilities, down to LTS 4, which is really only tolerated by kind of the most gung-ho cyclists out there. And you can see in this map of McLean that most of the neighborhood streets, the lower speed streets, the less traveled streets are pretty comfortable for folks, less stressful than, say, Dolly Madison Boulevard and sort of those arterials that people would feel less comfortable bicycling along. Okay, next slide. Couple transit metrics. First one is transit access, and we would use this with pedestrian level of comfort and bicycle level of traffic stress. First thing you do with transit access is you measure the distance or the radius as the crow flies around a transit station area or a bus stop. And so you can see in the example of Huntington Metro Station here, you have these circles of varying distances. And then within those circles and sort of outside of those are shaded areas. And those kind of indicate where people can actually bike or walk at a given distance. So you might have a circle around an area that has a radius of a quarter mile. Can you actually walk a quarter mile from the station to everywhere you'd want to go within that circle? In most cases, probably not. There's disjointed sidewalks and places where you're not going to be able to get to because of other barriers. And so the idea behind this is really trying to identify those barriers or identify those misconnections and try to build a better network for people to access transit. And then the other transit metric, transit ridership, kind of sounds like an operations metric, but we're really in this case just looking at ridership and comparing it to the amenities present at a bus stop or other transit location. So if we have high ridership somewhere, are we also providing the amenities that folks would expect, such as a bench or a bus shelter? Can we do more to encourage ridership by providing those amenities? And then the next slide. This is the last slide here. So crashes, crashes we've included for many years now, sort of looking back at the history of crashes in an area. This example is of the corridor study of Gallows Road. And what we're doing in that study is not just looking at the history, but trying to be a little more proactive and looking at not only, okay, if at Maple Place, for example, you've got both a high number of crashes and you've got some high severity crashes. So fatal crash, you've got some serious injury crashes. And so we develop hotspot locations based on both the frequency and the severity of crashes, and then look along the corridor to see if there are similar locations where crashes could occur in the future and see what we can do, again, to be more proactive and provide countermeasures to fix those locations and to, again, try to create a safer corridor. And then lastly, vehicle miles traveled. This is one that we'd be using, again, in corridor studies to look at different options or different alternatives. So if we have a certain type of land use or a certain type of lane configuration along a corridor, or maybe there's a bus rapid transit system that we're recommending, we're going to look to see how that might affect vehicle miles traveled per capita. So how much the average person is having to drive, and seeing if we can kind of move the needle and reduce that. And eventually we would sort of roll this into sustainability metrics. And I know our site analysis team who works on the zoning cases is looking at how we would sort of relate this to CO2 reductions. So this is, again, a way to collect data and then kind of help us make more informed decisions on what alternatives we could select and improvements to put forward. So to kind of wrap things up, again, the idea behind this new study type that we're rolling out, it's not to supplant or supersede what VDOT is doing. They still have requirements called TIAs, Transportation Impact Analyses, that we still have to adhere to. This kind of goes beyond that. It supplements their requirements and again provides a fuller picture of all modes in the transportation network, and making sure that when we are providing a recommendation or we are proposing a solution, that we have our eyes kind of wide open to the other impacts and the trade-offs that might occur when we propose those solutions. So happy to answer any questions you might have now, or I can also put my email in the chat if you've got questions after the call.
Yep. Tim, you have a question from Sonia. Thank you for raising your hand, Sonia. Appreciate that. Ask your question, please.
Sure thing. Thanks. Yeah, I'm really excited to see sort of this moving forward. I think the additional measures are badly needed to sort of do the analysis and really better balance all of these modes, like you're saying. So I'm very happy to see that, and it looks great. I think my question is related to the modal emphasis for the different areas. I wonder if there's going to be an opportunity, because it sounds like you're going to create a guide soon, a user's guide, an opportunity for feedback on what y'all are developing. I think, so with regards to the chart with the modal emphasis, and I know you said it's sort of a lot of the trade-offs and discussion will be at the end, but I wonder about if we're able to refine or fine tune some of those areas, because, I think, in some activity centers, I think I heard the board at the Transportation Committee talk about concern where there is not as much transit that's accessible, to sort of they wanted in those areas to make sure that vehicle traffic was still accounted for, which I'm sure it will be. But I was sort of on the flip where, suburban areas that do have access to good transit, and so inside the Beltway where we have frequent bus, or that the metro stations are, within a couple of miles, and those first last mile connections are pretty decent and could be better, but still, those suburban areas, and I forget the exact number, didn't have transit as a priority. And so I just sort of wonder if there's a way to sort of even further finesse those areas to identify somewhere where transit is, in greater proximity, that we should be prioritizing transit, even if it is a suburban area, because it's still a very viable option and should be encouraged, as opposed to other areas of the county where, we might have a suburban center where we want greater activity, but maybe transit quite isn't there yet. So that's the one area I was looking at and just wondering how you might refine that and whether or not we have opportunities to sort of provide feedback on that specifically.
That's an excellent point. And Bob, actually, if you go to the next slide, where we kind of show the modal priorities. Yeah, that's something that came up at the board transportation committee meeting, and it's come up a couple times. We've adjusted the modal priorities. I don't know, probably 4 times throughout the course of this project, because I mean, you're right. There's some CBCs or transit station areas are very different than others in the county, and so one thing that we've said in the user's manual that we've developed is these are kind of a guide. This really needs to be discussed and agreed upon at scoping. So when we scope these studies with an applicant and with VDOT and with others, we're going to kind of use this as a guide, and there has to be a good reason to change it. So, for example, if we see, like in the example that you were saying, if we see that we need to really try to prioritize transit in a suburban neighborhood, for example, based on kind of the context of the area that's being studied, we can adjust that at scoping. And another thing that we would be doing is going out to the community and hearing from them kind of what their priorities are. So it's kind of tough because we wanted to set some sort of modal priority to kind of nudge people in the right direction, but there's certainly, like you said, going to be those cases where it doesn't quite line up with what we're showing here, and so then we would need to have that discussion at kind of the scoping meeting and deciding how we really want to treat a specific area in the county.
Yeah, and just as a follow-up, I think, that idea of we're wanting to nudge in a better direction and we're using this for future planning, like we ought to be, as I think our policy plan talks about, reducing single occupancy driving. So I'd rather see you include and highlight the little transit bubble in that space, and then through the scoping and discussion at the end, say, yeah, we can't quite do that. And then let that be, we're stepping down from that. But like, it would be nice to see in our plans that we are in fact nudging folks to use transit, even in our suburban areas, as sort of a North Star, if you will. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Tim, we have a question from Larry. Larry, please unmute and ask your question.
Okay, thank you. So I guess one thing is, I guess I have 2 questions. One is, if you want to encourage use at different stops like Metro, one of the things I think that's important is the activities that are there. For example, if they have food, I think multifamily residential, I think that makes a world of sense, and some other things. I didn't exactly hear that. Maybe that's part of your vision, but that's just a comment. If you look at what Arlington's done, for example, they had a heavy focus on having multiple uses take place at Metro transit stations, and I think that was very successful. At least that's my opinion on it. The main reason I came to this meeting, though, and maybe you're going to cover it later, is I was interested in the question of electric vehicles and other electric transportation that that might be coming on board, how it's going to be supported. I didn't hear anything on that, I don't think, in your presentation, and that might be something you're going to cover later.
Bob, is that covered later?
Larry,
I know.
yeah, right. It's in the so Larry, in the electric vehicles discussion, that is actually Our transportation policy plan will discuss that at a later date. The next presentation after Tim's presentation is talking about the other regional transportation policies in and around the area of Fairfax County. But electric vehicles is a topic that it'll be covered in a transportation discussion or presentation in the future. And our other element, the environmental element, will also be looking at environmentally the electric vehicles and then also charging stations and all that. But we don't have a presentation for you tonight about that.
That is absolutely fine. I was just trying to get a better
Okay.
sense for how all these different activities fit together. So
Right.
thank you.
Yeah. So there's as we're developing the policy plan for transportation, land use, environment, parks, open space, and all that, we'll be rolling into, and we're getting these ideas from the community members about electric vehicles and electric vehicle charging stations and all that. I do believe in Taylor's presentation coming up, she does mention it briefly on EV charging stations or even on roadside charging stations, but it's just a very brief discussion point. So you might be able to ask your question at the end, but I think it's going to be more rolled into in a future discussion that we don't have tonight. So, but we
That
are
sounds
thinking
fine.
about it. But we are thinking about it.
And then to your first question about activities, that's really something that would be covered by our Department of Planning and Development. So you're absolutely right. Having more activities around the metro stations definitely is a driver of a lot of these studies, but it's not something that the studies necessarily would kind of recommend a change to. So normally what would happen is we've had a number of these over the last few years. Somebody, a developer, maybe nominates a change in land use or intensity near a metro station, and then as a result of that, because of a higher number of trips, vehicle trips expected, we would do one of these studies to see, okay, what's the impact of including more of those activities, that higher density in this location. And what this does is, again, not just look at kind of the vehicular impacts, but we're going to have a lot more people walking in this metro area. We have a lot more people trying to bike here. Are we accommodating those modes? This sort of helps kind of strike the balance. So hopefully that kind of answers your question.
Thank you. I also think I should share with you in full disclosure that I chair EQAC, and so we have an interest in obviously the electric vehicles, and if we could be of any assistance to Taylor or any of you, any of the rest of your team, let us know, because I'm interested in seeing all this come together well. So thank you so much.
Yeah, Larry, thanks for letting us know that you're part of the EQAC team. So you probably have already heard about some of the environmental discussions. I can add to Tim's in that with transit use or transit station areas that we have in the land use element is the transit-oriented development. It's an appendix, I think it's appendix 11. So that is both land use and transportation. So in our work on the policy update, we'll be working with the land use team to look at the transit-oriented development policies and see where we need to adjust or modify or add to the policies that were previously written. And in our work today or going forward as to how we can roll into new policies related to development or looking at sensitive development around transit stations. So it's like a destination but center, but it also has a live work potential or retail, housing, commercial, office, all kinds of uses like that. So we'll be looking at that in detail as well. So no, good comments, and yeah, thank you for serving on the EQAC as well. So we appreciate that.
Thank you.
You bet. Now, any other questions from the audience on Tim's presentation or just in general? If not, I am going to advance forward to the next presentation, and then Taylor will be able to speak to that. Go ahead, Taylor, you're up. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. I will be presenting on local jurisdictions, transportation policies, and issues at the forefront. We took a look at 5 different plans from localities in the DC region, as noted in the slide. Each plan has strengths, with the common theme being they all have good graphics and visuals that allow the reader to be engaged and keep the plans from reading like a typical document. There were a few trends from the plans. First, they emphasized moving away from cars and thinking about other modes of transportation, building the transportation network in such a way that they are not only adding lanes or building new roads, but looking from a comprehensive approach that focuses on all users and not only cars. Next, thinking about how to coordinate with other localities in the region, along with making sure there are cohesive values, coordination, and connections. Sustainability has been at the forefront. Modes which are seen as being more environmentally friendly are increasingly being prioritized. Finally, equity is being added. And although it has not been traditionally included, it is now being referenced in these plans because it has become part of the decision-making process for transportation. Transportation goals are the broadest category of ideas described in these plans. They are intended to work towards the locality's mission, as well as along the lines of providing the best quality of life for residents. A transportation goal example is to improve safety. Policies are intended to guide decision-making and will be more specific in scope than a goal. An example is to design roadways in a manner that reduces fatalities and injuries. Strategies are the most specific steps that are taken. These are generally small, concrete steps that can be taken to implement the broader policies and goals. Strategies can be implemented in both the short term and the long term. An example is to expand the number of high visibility crosswalks and at intersections in a locality. Metrics are used to track the progress of the previously mentioned categories. They may involve measuring the results from strategies, policies, and goals, and could include data analysis. This is an example from the Move DC plan. The slide shows a strategy, as shown in all caps. Below that is some additional information about the strategy. The goals and policy that it aligns with are noted on the right, in this case addressing 3 of the 7 goals as highlighted. Implementation steps, including short-term, medium-term, and long-term steps, are provided. Metrics are clearly stated, and an accompanying image reinforces the topic of the policy. The layout is easy to follow, provides the reader with thorough but concise information, and provides an easy to understand what it means for you section. Vision Zero is a goal adopted by numerous localities, including DC, which seeks to reduce traffic fatalities and serious injuries to zero. Vision Zero was created in response to the high number of roadway deaths that occur every year. The plan can take on a variety of forms, but usually involves better driver education on safety practices, increased enforcement of reckless driving and speeding, designing safer roadways that discourage high speeds, and better pedestrian and bike infrastructure that protects users and reduces the likelihood of conflict with vehicles. Currently, the Active Transportation team is working on the Active Fairfax Transportation Plan effort to establish a vision and a roadmap for implementation of safe, convenient, and enjoyable streets and trails in Fairfax County. Active streets, as shown from the city of Fairfax, can be implemented in mixed-use environments and introduce a number of elements that separate them from traditional arterials. Additional space is dedicated to pedestrians and bikes by adding bike lanes and a pedestrian area, which is typically a wide sidewalk or pathway that is back of curb. Street furniture, such as seating, may be included to provide places for people to gather. Landscaping and street trees provide a more comfortable pedestrian experience. Businesses and restaurants may include spaces for shopping and dining along the pedestrian pathway. Active streets may be designed to reduce vehicular speeds and deprioritize the car. Option 1 includes a bike lane, buffer, and a wider sidewalk on the left side, whereas Option 2 demonstrates a different use in the right-of-way. Bike sharing provides an opportunity for people to rent bikes for a given amount of time, then return the bike once they are finished using it. Bikes which are not in use can remain at docking stations for easy access. Shared mobility is beneficial to people who don't need a bike, scooter, or similar device all the time and would instead prefer to only rent it when they need to travel somewhere. A key to effective shared mobility is the inclusion of many docking station locations or the ability to drop the bike off at a user's destination. Many localities have excessive parking, including on-street parking. Rethinking how parking is managed can help to reduce dependency on driving, especially in urban areas. Parking requirements in certain new developments may be reduced if there are existing feasible transportation alternatives. Curb space is seen as a community asset, and allowing long-term on-street parking can prevent others from accessing commercial centers and businesses. Pricing and regulation of curb space can ensure that all users have access to adjacent businesses. Electric vehicle charging stations can also be introduced in parking areas, which can encourage use. Smart mobility incorporates the use of technology into the street network and intersections. For example, traffic signals, which are able to detect traffic volumes and delay, could adapt their signal timing to better manage traffic flow and reduce congestion. If there are a large number of cyclists or pedestrians present, the technology could allow those users to have preference over cars. Smart technology can also help drivers locate services and infrastructure such as parking garages and EV charging stations. Plans which are visually engaging can make the reader more interested in the topic and make the plan more interactive. Long text paragraphs may be information heavy and unengaging. The use of good graphics can convey important information to the reader. Listing the goals, policies, and strategies is key to a coherent and consistent document. If a plan does not include the goals, it can be difficult to see why the plan is important or why a certain aspect of transportation matters. Each of these plans recognizes that the existing conditions and the given locality are not perfect, and the plan builds off of current policy gaps and/or transportation needs. Other documents, where equity related or planning land use related, should be mentioned and referenced throughout the transportation policy plan when relevant. This creates consistency across documents and helps to further the locality's overall mission. There are many additional transportation ideas that could be incorporated in Fairfax County. While each locality is different, these transportation ideas could provide some additional ways for Fairfax to think about transportation and could spark ideas for transportation projects in the future.
Okay, thank you, Taylor. We'll open it up for questions from the audience. And Larry, you rose your hand first, so please unmute and ask your question.
So I'm going to ask a question, and I have no idea if there is an answer to it. So I think it makes sense to reduce unneeded parking. But on the other hand, one of the things that I would be that needs to be balanced, I think, is if you live in a residential community as I do, bus service has actually decreased from the time that I moved in to today. So today it's they run much less frequent, and so if you look at a lot of the other folks that live in communities like the one I live in, um, their access to public transportation is going to be reduced, and so when they go out, they're pretty much largely going to be dependent upon um, vehicle use, unless there's a lot more buses. And so I don't know if that's something you're trying to grapple with, but that's just something to balance in all of this.
Yeah, so I can respond. Yeah, so as we're looking at the policy plan update here, and one of our key goals, or it was one of the goals from the original transportation policy plan, was to reduce the single occupant vehicle use. So, and we are pushing more for multimodal transportation. So besides vehicles, you can use ped, bike, transit, micromobility, as one of the slides said just a little while ago. And the focus is changing in the county, and we're looking to change that and do that with our policy plan. Some of Tim's presentation also looked at how we're looking at metrics to study those with new development plans or corridors, corridor studies, or even area plans that the county undertakes, or even the site-specific plan amendments that are brought in by developers as they're bringing in new projects. So you can see, or we can see, that there is a change happening, and we are pushing more for, it's not just vehicles, but there's other ways to get about. And with transit, understanding that some neighborhoods may not have full access to transit and all that, but that's something that we can look at as far as policies, is to look at policies and guidance that maybe we can keep enhancing transit, keep moving forward with providing opportunities for additional neighborhoods or additional communities to have better access to transit, or locating more transit stops or bus stations or something to that effect. So that's something that, you have a good comment, we'll just keep adding that to our list, but it's just like we are hearing that from other community members as well. It's like, I don't have a bus close by, I need better access. A lot of parking on our streets, but there's also a lot of cars on our streets. There's big parking lots, but not everyone's parking at the parking lot. Well, all kinds of things. So as we're gathering all this input, we're creating our list of comments from the community, but also we're looking at how we can write new policies to implement better tactics and strategies for creating more of the multimodal feel for the county. Work is coming.
Thank you.
And we're still going to keep working on it. So the policy plan is not done yet. So we are still working on that. So thank you, Larry, for your comment. Appreciate that. Sonia, you have a comment. Please unmute and ask the question.
All right. So I have a couple different things I wanted to bring up here. I'm glad you guys are looking at local jurisdictions. I started to do the same to see who might have updated their plans recently. And I was looking at Alexandria's mobility plan. And I just wanted to know, I really liked how they have a chart that indicates the related policies and plans that are supported by certain goals in their transportation element. So, I think where we can cross-reference the different plans, the county plans that are being supported by certain types of, if we're investing or prioritizing walking and biking or transit, it also supports our environmental goals, our sustainability goals, our health goals. And the more we can kind of cross-reference in each document, it sort of helps us to remember, that these are all interrelated and an integral part of our communities and how we are more sustainable and how we're more mobile and all of these things, and get us out of our silos a little bit, right? Like where the environment is just dealing with environmental issues and the transportation's only doing sort of engineering. And better reference each other. So I just sort of point to that because I thought it was really helpful. It'd be, I think, an interesting exercise for Fairfax as well to sort of incorporate into the document some kind of cross-referencing of what policies are supported by these goals that we're listing off. And to that, I mentioned the environment. We continue to hear about issues with street trees or trees and active transportation networks sort of conflicting because we're sort of an add-on to the road network. But to me, I feel like street trees need to be an integral part of our street network because it makes walking, biking, waiting on the bus, more comfortable and thereby viable when we're having these increasing heat episodes in the summer that are hotter and longer, and we're having these climate impacts. So the more we can integrate, some of these I keep asking for trees, right? And I know there's a challenge with some of the requirements and whatnot, but I'd love to see some reference to the need for shade trees to make
Mhm.
it possible to walk places, and that it supports our climate goals and all these other goals, right? So have you guys thought, is it possible to sort of incorporate some of these, into the policy plan when we're talking about the need for trees, or are you guys sort of staying in your own lane and not thinking about that?
We're thinking beyond that. I mean,
Oh,
we're
good.
along those same lines. It's like it's not just about transportation, it's also about the experience of transportation on our roadways. So as you're mentioning about the trees, the shade, some corridors, even shade structures for transit stops or something, or the experience that's back of curb for a um, a cycle track or an off the curb bike path or wider sidewalks and all that. So we're looking at that from the experience perspective, and it's not like it used to be just the mobility of vehicles through the road. We're looking at the experiences beyond that. Um, One of the great things about the work that we're doing with this policy update and is that we are working with relevant or actually um, other elements that are akin to transportation, such as land use and environment, open space and parks, and there's going to be overlap. And we've already noticed that in overlap on our initial work on looking at what is in the policy plan today, but there's also transportation type policies in land use. There's some in environment, parks, um, the new health equity, the new health and equity element that is not in the current plan, working with the planners there and looking at how can health be incorporated into transportation, or how can healthy living be incorporated into transportation, and how can that healthy living be also included in land use and all that. So it's um, it's going to be a meshing effect on how there's going to be either overlap or um, when we are writing the new policies that we can be complementary to the other elements. So if there's something related to uh, trees or something, or landscaping along the and I keep looking at this picture that's on the screen for the Capital Bike Share, but there's also a tree planter right there, and there's a transit. So I keep looking at that as an example. Is that you got a wide sidewalk, you have some shade already built in, or built in sort of growing. So it's like it's looking at the complete experience. So it's just like when we're starting to develop all the policy plans and the elements and the actual specific recommendations, we'll be looking at it on a more holistic basis like that. So you have a good comment, Sonia. So good thing we're
Thank
recording
you.
this because we're not going to forget it now. So
There you go. Thank you.
yeah.
I appreciate that. And the one other thing I just wanted to mention or ask about is curbside prioritization. We talked about on-street parking needs. They often compete with bike lanes, and honestly,
Mhm.
even now, like Uber, drop off, pickup, quick grab, I'm going to go grab some food kind of thing, or how are we using our curb space that becomes busier and busier?
Mhm.
Are y'all looking at that? Is that something we can incorporate into this? Is there a prioritization? I thought I might have heard somebody mention that Alexandria had some kind of a prioritization metrics, but I wondered if you guys were looking at that.
Yeah, we'll be looking at that too. So if the example is from the neighboring jurisdiction, we can look to see what they've already provided or what they're putting in their policies, and then we can see how that can adapt to Fairfax County. So in a way, we're going to borrow their ideas, but just adapt it to Fairfax County and make it better. At least that's the goal. So yeah,
Great,
thank you for
thank
that.
you.
Larry, you have another question?
I have a follow-up. So
Okay.
in listening to the last comments, I thought I should share with you that ECRAC has taken up the issue of trees in the VDOT right of way. And so we in September we had a meeting that included VDOT as well as a number of different county agencies, obviously Fairfax County DOT and
Mhm.
others. And so one of the things we'll be looking at probably in November, we'll start a dialogue about our policies and ask the question, what more could we do? One of the things that kind of came out of our first meeting was the VDOT right of way is so limited that there often isn't really enough space
Mhm.
to plant trees, and so that makes it difficult.
Mhm.
But I wanted to share with you that information because I don't know if I wanted to be sure it was shared with you. That's all.
No, thank you. That's a good point. Yes, VDOT right away is limited back of curb, and the focus has traditionally been for the vehicle. Really quickly, Larry, can you remind us all what EQAC stands for? Because I
I
know
can
you're
do
talking
that.
about it, so please.
Environmental Quality Advisory Council.
Okay.
We advise the Board of Supervisors.
Yep. And you are working with our policy team on the environmental section, I believe.
Yes, OEC is the part of the county staff that we work with.
Okay. And there is a little bit of an overlap between transportation and environment, if you're starting to hear some of that discussion about that.
Yes,
Yep.
yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your comment too. We have a question from Cindy. Please go ahead.
Hi, I don't really have a question. I just want to make a few comments. I am thrilled with everything I've heard tonight from all of the speakers. I am pro multi-modal vehicles. I love the active streets and the smart mobility. I think we need to change the culture of our community so that it's not just single drivers and getting into a car. I used to commute by bicycle when I was younger. Now I just bicycle I live in Franconia, so I bicycle to Inova, Franconia, Springfield for doctor's appointments, but and I bicycle for fun. But how do we change the culture? I got invited to this meeting because I attend the Franconia District Land Use Committee meetings, just as an individual. My civic association is anti-development, they're really afraid, I think, a few people, it's a minority number of people, but they're really afraid that, they're going to take away our cars. And it's just ridiculous. And ironically, none of them came to this meeting. But how do we change the culture? One thing I am concerned about, like my neighbor works long hours at the Pentagon and gets home, and then she has DoorDash bring her food. It's like, why don't you just stop on the way home? It just annoys me. But I mean, it's just they have a mindset of convenience. And I wish we were more like Europe, where people, don't think twice about riding a bicycle. But anyway, keep doing what you're doing. I think it's wonderful. I've loved everything I've heard tonight.
Great. Thank you. And
You're
yes, we're trying to change the culture, but it's long ingrained. So folks like you attending these meetings and helping us to come up with some ideas for our policy plan update, that's what we need, is people like you to give us ideas to keep pushing forward and looking to provide guidance for the county for the next 20, 25, 30 years or so. That's what we're doing here. That's why we're doing this project. So
Yeah. Thanks so much. I'm behind you.
You're welcome. Great. Thank you. Okay. On the screen is the ways to connect to the policy plan amendment. There's a website if you want to grab a picture of this or Google these. You can get to the policy plan. What's existing in the second bullet is already written there. That's the existing plan that was written 30 years ago. And if you want to provide input besides this forum here, you can just send an email to planforwardffx@publicinput.com, and it'll be forwarded out to the appropriate team member. If there are no other questions, and I don't see any, I'd like to thank everyone for attending this meeting tonight. Appreciate the input. and your enthusiasm for our project. And I would like to thank our two presenters, Taylor and Tim, for doing a great job in presenting tonight's session. And with that, thank you all for attending. Have a good night and have a great weekend.